Hello everyone and welcome to episode 9 of Keep the Vision, a podcast exploring all things personal development with the aim of inspiring others to become the best they can be. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, William O'Donnell. Hello William, how are you my friend?
Yeah, I'm good, Alan. Good to see you again. And tonight is a very special night because we've got a very special guest on, a guy who's made a big difference to my life over the years, the founder of Mindstore himself, Jack Black. How you doing, Jack?
Hi, William. Great, really good. And thanks for having me, Alan. It's really kind of you both to reach out. Quite excited about participating with you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I know your time's precious, so we really appreciate you coming on. I think obviously most of the listeners know who you are, Jack, but maybe for the people that don't know who you are, maybe just let's go back to the beginning and just talk about how you get involved in Mindstore and go back to the start.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought for 1 minute I'd be doing all of this or done what I did with my career. I was a social worker, youth worker, working in Easterhouse primarily in East End of Glasgow. And a series of events happened over the space of a fortnight where 3 people died suddenly on me. One was from a massive heart attack, one was from stroke, and one was from something that happened to a tumour in another guy's brain. Now, all these 3 people were significant in my life. One was my then mother-in-law. One was Assistant Director of Education for the biggest authority in all of Europe at the time, the then Strathclyde Regional Council. And one was one of Her Majesty's inspectors who I got to know very, very well, who was a bit of a mentor for me in my early work, working with kids at risk in the streets. And when they died, each of them, I found myself asking big questions like, well, why did they die? Because the first thing was each of them were 39 years old.
Oh.
But again, living in the west of Scotland, Glasgow area back then, people just did die young. Heart attacks, strokes, cancer. We were the best in the world at it. We probably might still be, but we certainly were back then, number 1 in the league table, dying prematurely from these diseases. And when I started asking the question to colleagues and stuff, it became obvious to me it was stress that killed him. But this sounds ridiculous, people maybe hear for the first time. Way back then, you couldn't talk about stress. That was for wimps. They didn't call you a wimp, they called you something far more ridiculous. And it was not recognised, it wasn't in the zeitgeist, no one talked about it. People were ashamed of it if they were stressed. If you mentioned it, you'd never get a promotion sort of thing. But I realised it was stress and I decided to do something about it. And what happened was I realised that I wanted to be, the guy who was Assistant Director of Education was a phenomenal model of a manager. In fact, he was the best guy I've ever worked for at being a manager. Everybody just loved him to bits and he cared for every one of us, but never paid him enough because it killed him. Mm-hmm. And I realised that I wanted to be him. And then I realised that I actually didn't want to be him. And I realised I had to get out because the only way I could do it would do it the way that he did it, and it would kill me too. And so I was running skiing trips for charity amongst social workers and teachers and other people around the sort of Strathclyde professional group sort of stuff around then, and local people in Cumbernauld, and I was running that. Started running trips abroad for like the rugby clubs or skiing groups and stuff like that. And I'm doing that on the side, still keeping my job. And one day I went for a haircut in Betty Riley's in Hope Street. Some of people might remember that hairdresser. And I collapsed in the hairdressers. And it was the collapsing, realising I was getting my first, probably my last warning that I can't continue to live my life like this, working 80-hour weeks. A young man, you think you can do everything, but actually you can't. And that led me off in this amazing journey. How do you manage stress? And that just blew away.
Wow, what a story, Jack. I mean, it's incredible that. And what age were you back then when you made that change?
29 years old I was when I collapsed with pressure of the stress of running the business 40 hours in the week, 40 odd, 37 and a half officially, but usually about 40 hours on the job, working to 10 at night and stuff in the streets and so on. And it just wiped me out. You know, it just burnt me out. And it was frightening. It was pretty horrific. But then I realised I had to do something about it. You know, what happened was I left the bookstore. So I left Betty Riley's. They were panicking, and I was kind of like, I'm okay, and got a cup of tea off them or something. And I went round the road into the then John Smith's bookstore, which at that time was the oldest bookstore in the whole of Scotland, that particular building. And I'm in there and I remember asking so there was a wee woman at the front, and I said, have you any books on stress? And she kind of looked at me and says, I doubt it, but maybe somewhere away at the back there. And I went away round the back, and there was the old floorboards and the old sort of bookshelves. And I don't know whether it was me creaking along or whatever it was, but a book fell from the shelf. And the book was old Jose Silva's book, The Silva Method. And I picked up in the back of it, there was people who had a big impact in my life, like the guy who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull, Richard Bach, saying, you've got to read this book. And I'm like, okay, I need to read this book. So I bought the book, didn't know what it was, went up to my car, I parked it up the road a bit, and I was still sitting there at 8 o'clock at night reading it. And I thought, why doesn't everybody know about this stuff? And I got in touch with them, and I was very fortunate. They were looking for someone to take up the mantle, and I got trained, and I got interviews and all sorts of things, and I got trained by them, and then they sacked me. Not old Hosey, who I got on with really well, but guy was quite threatened by what I was doing, because the way they worked was you could only do courses for the public. You could never go into businesses unless you had 10 years experience. And I was like, well, Joe Public isn't going to buy this. It's 400 quid a pop for a start. And that was a way back then, not today. And I thought, well, companies will pay for this. So I started knocking on the doors of companies, and I started winning business, and I was winning business around the UK. And I get sacked for doing that. So what was interesting was I then spent 6 months researching. There wasn't an internet back then. There just was books or courses, and you know, I'd already bought tons of books, and I started devouring them and started meeting people. And then I had a dream. And in the dream, there was this river, and the other side of the river was this big house with a big red roof, and the rest's history. And so then what I did was I wrote my first course. I sent it to Jose Silva, who was alive at the time, and asked him if it was threatening him in any way. Was it breaking copyright? And a big copyright attorneys that worked for me. And they came back and said, no, he's quite impressed with it. You're okay to go. And that was me.
At that time then, Jack, when you were, you'd obviously been having a lot of stress in your life. You had that collapse and the hairdressers, and then you've gone on to study the subject a bit more. Did you share your plans for the way forward with family members, with friends? And if so, how did they take it?
Well, it was interesting because initially when I did it, I did it like part-time, as it were. And then I soon realised that I wasn't going to make it work. If I did it part-time, and it was beginning to dig into the job. So I had this choice. There came a point, what do you do? And I left the security of working full-time for the biggest authority in Europe with a good career ahead of me. Apparently I was getting coached to go places, and I went off my own, and the biggest support was my father. My father was amazing, just in terms of the support he gave me and encouragement. And then it was a case of just doing what everybody else has to do when you start a business. I mean, I remember one morning getting up, I'd managed to get an interview I managed to get myself a presentation thing with the Littlewoods catalogue people down in Liverpool. And I remember driving down my beat up old car. I had shorts on, and what we used to call a pair of gutties, a t-shirt, a pair of shorts, drove all the way down and just sit in the back of the car, got into this high level car park somewhere in the centre of Liverpool, using maps, no GPS back then. And I got out of the car and I got myself all changed into this suit, and I'm looking at myself in the mirror and all this kind of stuff, making sure I'm okay. Go down the stairs, get round the street, and as I got up into their office place, they realised as I was coming in, I was the guy they were all laughing at in the car park changing. And I didn't get the gig, you know, and I had to drive away back up the road again.
Yeah.
And that's what it was like. I mean, people sometimes see me on stage and think, well, I could do that. Well, actually, you probably can't, because it takes a lot of work to get an audience. And I did a good 30 years at it. I don't particularly want to go looking for audiences again. If they show up, and they do, I got a phone call today from Denmark to do some work with a client they've got up there, actually in Kuwait, where I've worked before. That was just today. I'm working with around Europe with a major company. I'm busy, but the whole thing about getting bums is not, as I'm sure you guys have found out sometimes, it's not easy. It's not easy. Sure. And I've done it. I've got the T-shirt, and I don't want to do it again.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, Jack. I mean, obviously, coming from, I lived in East End of Glasgow myself. I was Carntyne, close to Easterhouse, so we kind of grew up in the same areas. And I've got family through Cumbernauld. I know you're from that territory. But obviously, we've called this podcast Keep the Vision because, like you've taught so many people over the years, the process and how powerful visualisation and goal setting is. So, back then, I'm quite interested to know, you've obviously had a vision, you know, of all the years ago, what could be done, what you could achieve. Yeah. So you must be so proud of what you've done, obviously, and obviously you're still going. But what's been the greatest moments for you then, for all that you've done over the last 20 or 30 years regarding personal development?
Wow. I remember one day in the pouring rain, parking my, again, beat up old Mini when I was still working for the council in an old piece of waste ground car park in Glasgow, going up to a meeting in Bath Street where the education authorities had their office in Glasgow, the Glasgow Education Authority office. And I parked in, and you paid whatever it was to park there. And just as I was driving in, there was an announcement that they were going to build a concert hall there. And I remember getting out the car, and at this point I'd started doing these wee part-time coursey things, and I remember I stood in the middle of where they said it was, and I just closed my eyes and I visualised filling the concert hall. I hadn't even put the first brick down, and of course I managed to do that. So that was an awesome moment to have the confidence and the what's to do it, because it was totally impossible. I mean, I was like, maybe get 4 people would show up and put an ad in Evening Times back then, and 4 people would show up at a library somewhere in Glasgow where I'd booked a room for an hour to talk about my work, and hopefully somebody would sign up, and nobody did. And so there I was, having this visualization of being on that stage. Look, I've got tons and tons of them, and I think for the people watching, whether you're a Mindstore person or not, it's really, really important. The big book says the moment a nation loses its vision, it perishes. It's the same for everybody in that nation. It's the same for you and I, for everybody watching right now or listening right now. If you don't have vision, you're heading to the box. That's just the way it is. And especially got to watch when you get to my age and people kind of regularly come, when you're retiring no. I mean, I don't work the way I used to. I'm not daft about getting on planes every day any longer. But like a lot of my heroes, I'd like to think I'll be working the day that I find my way into the box.
Yep.
No, I was just going to say amazing. Obviously, that's a vision. You know, a building isn't even there yet, and you had the idea to be in there one day. So that's where I met yourself back in 2004, Jack, for the Mindstore for Life course. So I was actually introduced to yourself through a friend, and it was back in the days. This is going back a few years. It was back when you had the Mindstore tapes. So if you showed a kid now. If you showed a kid now the Mindstore tapes, they would try and they would try and press a button or something. Yep, there we go. There we go. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Absolutely brilliant. So that's right. And I remember listening to them on back then. I think I was maybe 18, 19 before I was driving. So I was on the bus driving up Duke Street, up where I lived at that time, listening to the tapes and tangled up earphones. So that was my introduction to yourself. So, no, it's good to hear your backstory. I've known a little bit, but it's for the listeners, obviously, that didn't know how you get involved in this. It's a great story.
I think the thing about visioning is you've got to do it, but it's not an instant fix. You know, the universe to you, or the source, if you want to believe in, and the source could be just your subconscious, or it could be some more powerful external to us all, but all common to us all, depending on your belief. It takes time for that intelligence to get everything lined up for you. You know, obviously, I'm standing there in the pouring rain, visualizing being on a stage. There wasn't even a brick laid, but all the things that would have to happen for that to come about, it took many, many years. Lots of coincidences and bits and pieces and setbacks, but I was exactly in the right place at the right time when it happened, because I never gave up on it. I didn't just do what we're all taught to do as kids, you know, the tooth fairy, you know, put a tooth on and you know, 6 pins will appear in my day, whatever it was for kids nowadays. And then it was the Santa Claus thing, of course, we all find out that's a lot of nonsense. And then the whole thing about blowing out your candles and your birthday cake and make a wee wish, and none of that stuff works, folks. It's nonsense. What works is getting absolutely committed to the future you truly want, and not allowing yourself to choose a future that your left logical brain, because you keep asking or someone asks you about how you're going to do that, allowing yourself to be limited to what your left brain with its present understanding says is possible, but rather what you truly, truly want. When I was with that rain running down my face, I remember it as if it was like right now. I absolutely wanted to be on that stage. Not for me, but for you guys. Because I knew if I could fill that stage, hundreds and hundreds and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people would be using their life on this earth with a bit more care. And ambition, and so you've got to find what you really want, not what you're left. Because how can my left brain possibly say to me logically, "Oh, you'll be able to do that"? They hadn't even read a brick yet. But the truth, and I hadn't even got an audience yet. But the thing is, you make the commitment to what you truly, truly want, and then you commit. That's it. Simple.
Yep. Thanks, Jack. That's it's just great to hear you speaking with so much passion about this, because this subject is very close to William and I's heart. On the subject of, you know, having a vision, programming goals, I know that many a times I've heard you speaking about, you know, to fuel the desire, the belief and expectation around your goals. You've recommended some great books for us, such as, you know, The Magic of Thinking Big, The Power of the Subconscious Mind, and Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. These, for me, and I know for William too, have been hugely beneficial to us on our own journey. What can I ask, which books you're reading at the moment, Jack, that are helping you keep your journey going?
Well, let me just say, I recommended those 3 books at my very, very first course because they had a huge impact on me, each one of them in their own way. And I think they fit into the notion of desire, The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. Fantastic book. Think what you really want, not what your left brain says you can get. The Magic of Thinking Big, not the magic of thinking small. Yeah.
Yep.
Then in terms of the belief, the bit that you've got to keep working at when it all looks like it's not going to happen. And often it didn't look like it was going to happen for me. The Power of the Subconscious Mind by Dr. Joseph Murphy. And then finally, for the whole thing about expectation, just the magic of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Now, I was sharing those books with audiences back then at the beginning. I still recommend those books today, because all the other books, you can trace them back to those books. Especially everything goes back to Napoleon Hill. Anybody who thinks they're finding something new, quite frankly, isn't. And so, yeah, I occasionally pick up books that might be interesting. So I kind of, believe it or not, I read crime novels. I read,
awesome.
I go to bed at night with Rebus or Val McDermid, especially Scottish sort of. What do they call it? Crime noir or something? What is it? Something they call it? Scots noir or something? I don't know. But I tend to like that sort of book. I need a break from this stuff, if you know what I mean. I think you all know I've been very, very excited about the breakthroughs because of COVID, primarily for me. Not that I've had COVID yet, but the whole thing about metabolic health. I think we now know that what people are eating and drinking and so on absolutely affects their mental health. So there's a big, if I was starting again, that would be a huge part of my work.
Okay.
So that's the new thing. The new thing for me is, I used to stand and say, I said there were 4 characteristics of success. First one is manage your stress. We've talked about it. Be positive. Be a futurist, someone who has got vision and are committed and using both brain hemispheres. That's why I've mentioned the left brain so much already. But we hardly use our right brain. So Mindstore is all about developing a right brain and bring them together. And then later on, about 15 years in, I then added the management of emotions. And then finally, in this past 18 months, I've now added metabolic health. And I think these are the 6 things that human beings need to succeed and live their life to the full. And yeah, so if I was doing it again, starting off again, I would be working with those 6 rather than the 4 I did originally. And I would be, the courses would have been developed in such a way that all of those were covered.
Yeah, awesome. Obviously, there's a lot of things that I'd love to ask you, Jack. Obviously, all the things I've learned through Mindstore, through Nightbook and House in the Right Bank and everything else. But one of the most important things I think I learned from yourself was actually when it came to goal setting, which was, I remember years ago you said, focus on a vision you like to achieve, make your commitment to the vision, plan out how you will get there, and begin and take action. I remember just playing it back and back, and that was one of the most important things that I've learned for yourself. But we all know that everybody focuses on the sort of planning stage. So obviously, I took your advice and I made the commitment to the vision and everything else. And I've done vision boards for years and years. I've spent 20 years trying to manifest a lot of things into my life, from get married to having a son and everything else. But I think obviously there's challenges in society now, obviously, the times we're living in. But I feel there's a lot of sort of cynical and judgmental people towards personal development. How have you sort of managed that over the years when you're trying to get your point across?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the thing about the planning thing. You need to be, the whole traditional goal setting, and even to this day, is still based around, like a lot of things, based on a lot of nonsense. Primarily because of logical reasoning thinking constantly coming out of universities, particularly where a lot of left brain people congregate, right? And do their research. And so they're convinced that you need to set realistic, achievable goals. So they might talk about stretch, but they really don't mean it. Be realistic, set goals that are achievable, and make sure you've got a plan. Well, my experience is that the men and women who have inspired me and thousands of my audience, when we talk about it, are men and women who didn't set a realistic, achievable goal. And they couldn't possibly have a plan. It's like me on that rain-soaked afternoon in that waste ground of a car park in Glasgow. How could I possibly have had a strategy? They hadn't even laid a brick yet. I hadn't have an audience. So you don't have a plan but in the beginning. And I think it's important to say that. You need the quality of vision that absolutely excites you. Then, as time goes on, you'll find yourself planning like you do. So yeah, I think it's important that we say that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But forgive me, what was the rest of the question? I just wanted to make sure we got that across, William, because it's so important for an audience to hear that. You don't need to know how, in other words, just have a why.
Yeah, that's it. It was just the 4 steps of goal setting. Obviously you'd said focus on the vision you want to achieve. Like you say, everybody that's been in the course, like you say, the vision you had yourself for everything you've achieved, you focused on that more than the planning stage, and you've made the point over the years that's the most important thing. And something that I read recently, actually, you like this one. It's if your dreams aren't big enough, if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. So I think that's a great quote because I think share a wee quick story myself. Back in 2006, it was not long after I'd done the Mindstore course, I just had an ambition to live abroad, actually, and I don't know how I was going to do it. So I think for me, my goal was just to get myself over to Australia. I had no plan in place or nothing. I think it was just, I'm going there. And I told family members and I told people, and it was my goal. And it was a wee bit like, I imagine myself in Bondi Beach flipping a couple of burgers and things like that on a surfboard and jumping out of a plane and doing all the things like, obviously seeing Australian TV and, going to Sydney Opera House and things like that. So I had all these visions, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't have a lot of money at that time. I was sort of, I came from a sort of, working class family, didn't have a lot, early 20s. I think for me, I've kind of proved the point as well. No a bigger story as you, but I think I've proved the point that if it means that much to you, you'll get there. If it's the vision's there and you really want to do it, then I managed to get a job and work my way to get the cash to go there, and then everything sort of fell into place. And I met all these amazing people that are still friends to each day, and I've travelled around the world since then. So I think I just wanted to explain my story about it. So I think, like you say, vision is so key. Absolutely.
Yeah, and having this freedom not to worry about how. I mean, since you've mentioned Australia, one of the other big stories I've got is my wife and I were sitting in the garden towards the end of the summer many years ago now, and we're sort of thinking, well, what we'd like to do next. And she had read a book about something, and she looked at astrology. And cut a long story short, we wanted to go and visit Byron Bay, the furthest eastern point in the continent of Australia, and so we had this big blackboard that we used to have in the garden where we would write up our goals and draw little drawings and coloured chalks and stuff. So I went and I cleaned it all off and I go, okay, Australia, Byron Bay, and we've got a sort of some phrases we use. We wrote them down, they're private to us, wrote them down, made the commitment. We both sat down and meditated. 3 days later, I got a call from a customer saying, could we get you out to Australia to do a gig for us? And I was like, yes. Can I take my wife? Yes. So, I mean, it was 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, how can you plan that? You can't plan that.
You've just got to put it out there, isn't it? The law of attraction, isn't it? Yep, that's it.
When Jack, when we spoke last month to arrange a time for William and I to interview for this podcast, you were saying that thankfully that you've been very busy. Are you able to share with us what's coming up for Jack Black?
Well, I'm probably going to commit for another couple of years with the same client because I'm really, really enjoying working with them. It's fantastic, great people globally, and got the opportunity, and I'm writing material for them, so I'm always developing. I mean, one of the things I'm contemplating, and I said already, I don't really want to go back to filling the concert hall. I mean, if someone wants to fill it, I'll talk, but I don't want to have to fill it myself. But one of the things I'm contemplating, given that, I did what you were doing for a good year, doing those evening, every Wednesday night things. And I've been working, because of COVID, I've been working with a global client on Zoom and on Teams and stuff like that. I have been thinking of, could I possibly do a Mindstore course, a new updated version, some of the new stuff I came up with. Could I do that, like a Zoom thing or a whatever? So I'm looking into that. I might be interested in doing something like that in November if I thought there was interest. Because a lot of people ask me, would you do another course? And I go, well, not if I've got to organise it, but I've been saying to people, look, what if I did it just like online? Would you be interested? And be live? You know, I couldn't do a recording thing. And yeah, so there might be enough interest. If there's enough interest, I'll do that. So I'm looking forward to that. One of the things I would say to the audience, though, is one of the more advanced techniques that we do came out of Think and Grow Rich, which I've mentioned already, which is the notion of having in your imagination inner coaches, for want of a better term. And that all came from Napoleon Hill's work and his interview with then Andrew Carnegie back in 1908. And one of the things we're now finding is we're doing some interesting research that get cut off because of COVID. We'll link up with university, a great Mindstore member who's involved with me with this work. And we're kind of proving that what Carnegie was talking about is a scientific fact. That if you can get your brain to function at the right meditative level, where you can imagine having conversations, something profound happens in your brain, and we've witnessed it. And that research has been held back a little bit because of COVID, but hopefully, if we still remain open, we'll pick up on that again towards the back end of this year into next year. So I'm really, really excited about that, because that would help people go to another level of consciousness and awareness with some of the tools and techniques we're developing around it. So I'm really excited about that. So I'm still kind of, pushing the boat out and taking risks, which is what I want to do.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's just brilliant chatting to you about all this sort of thing. So where are you at the moment, Jack? Is it down south you're living?
I'm still in Canterbury. I live in Canterbury.
Yeah.
Yeah, we live down here. We used to live in the south of France for quite a while, and then we came back. Couldn't quite, because I get so used to the light in the south of France, I couldn't quite see myself being back in Glasgow. Just
too grey.
I love Glasgow, but just that greyness of the winter. So we moved down here because it's probably got the best weather in Britain down here. Sunlight, and it's for the sunlight that I live here, just to get the brightness of the light. But I'm coming up to Glasgow soon to see family, do a gig for my son's company. They're doing really well. They want me to do some stuff with staff. So things are good.
You mentioned earlier, Jack, I hope you don't mind me going back to it, about metabolic health.
Yes.
Would I be right in saying that that's in relation to the keto diet? And if it is...
Mostly the notion of low-carb diets. I mean, the doctors that are piling into the space now in university is fantastic. It's growing rapidly, breaking down old belief patterns and old scenarios in people's minds and paradigms. That what was interesting, it's over the 30 years when I was doing the stuff in the concert hall and elsewhere around the world, I was constantly fighting an illness. And at times it got the better of me. And I was promised a horrible, miserable death by a specialist in a Glasgow hospital if I didn't take their steroids. I took them reluctantly, and I continued to look for alternatives because I knew that the drugs would kill me before the illness if I kept doing what they were doing. And so anyway, I thought I was healthy because I was a vegan and I was a vegetarian. And I moved back and forward, and then I was a pescatarian. And nearly 12 years of being vegetarian, vegan, and it nearly killed me.
Really? Wow.
And it nearly killed me, and people really need to hear this. It wasn't because I was a vegan or a vegetarian, it was because actually I was what I call a grainarian. I was eating vegetables, of course I was, but most of my diet was grains. Processed grains, pasta, even the whole grain pastas and the whole grain rices, pastas, breads, pizzas, all vegetarian, all very healthy. And I used to buy big tubs, and I'm sure people still do, thinking they're healthy, big tubs of vegetable oils, sunflower oil particularly, and I'd fry all this stuff. That's what was making me ill. And that's what's killing millions of people on the planet. And the people who didn't cope so well with COVID, we can find a lot of it tracing back to certain kind of diets. People still think they're healthy, but really they're not. And so the sugar thing, processed sugars, processed carbs, vegetable oils, you get rid of all of that, people are reversing out of all sorts of diseases. Name a disease and you'll find somewhere in the world who's reversed out of it using low-carb diets. And when people hear it, of course, if they don't understand it, they immediately reject it. But actually, it's really, really important. And especially just now with the COVID thing led to, as we know, a massive increase in mental illness. The evidence for getting people off classic standard foods that people are eating in our country, it's often literally days, even certainly a few weeks, and people reverse out of severe situations in terms of anxieties and other things. It's quite dramatic. Cancers, heart disease, you name it, the impact's phenomenal. So I'm passionate about that. If you remember my first reason, I got into this work because people had died of a heart attack, a stroke, cancer.
Yeah.
I'm on the same game.
Yeah, I know it's frightening. I'm the same, Jack. I know people who's died young, and I've had a brother that's passed away young through tragic circumstances and that. But it's interesting because a lot of people, when they go to change, what do? They go to a gym and they try to change their body, but most of the problems is psychological. You know, like you say, mindset and mental health is the biggest things. So I think obviously you've helped thousands, if not millions, of people's lives. So there's never been a more challenging time just now, is there? You know, for things for Mindstore or people to get into Mindstore. So for anybody that's listening, Jack, that want to access your courses or anything online stuff, how can they get in touch with you? Sorry.
Well, mindstore.com is our basic website. There's also mindstoreonline.com, where there's a number of there's a free sort of introductory program and a free meditation. And then other things people can buy if they want, lots of programs there. There's an app that goes with that. And I spent a lot of time on social media, as you guys know, particularly over the COVID year. But I took a rest back when I'd been a year into doing the COVID thing every Wednesday night. And I've actually enjoyed being away from social media. I'm not sure I want to return to it, funnily enough, because I've enjoyed the freedom of not being involved. Having said that, I do feel that I need to test the waters. If people would be interested in doing an online course, then I should find out. And if I can find out there's enough people, then we could put it on. Because I do get requests from what people, I want this from my brother, or I want this from my son now. And I feel a wee bit guilty that I'm not providing it, but if I could do it, and I know it would work because I'm getting paid a lot of money from my clients who are happy to do it this way. I don't need to be on a stage dancing about to get the message across, and they did the meditation. So if people look for me there, and I will come on social media, I would think in the next fortnight to a month, to test out the waters for that idea. And if there was interest, then obviously we could all look forward to that. Yeah,
that's great to hear, Jack, and I look forward to seeing you online again soon. Jack, for myself, I would just like to thank you very, very much again for coming on our podcast tonight. It's been a big thrill for William and I. I was thinking about how, obviously your journey in the 30 odd years in Mindstore. The formation of the Glasgow Mindstore group, where I met William, and if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't be doing this podcast tonight. The journey that you've made, Jack, is branched off in so many other directions as well. So I like thinking about stuff like that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, if I can say, I think that the Mindstore group in Glasgow has just been a fantastic thing. The fact that it runs away with itself is just amazing. If they ever asked me to come up and do something, I'd be more than delighted. I feel a connection to everybody in Glasgow, clearly. I am coming up in a few weeks' time, September, but it's already sort of more or less sorted. But I'd be happy to come up again. if the group was interested in doing something.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic, Jack, because we had the sort of Mindstore day just before COVID at the end of 2019, I think it was, Alan, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's when you come in and done a live thing from probably your home at that time. So that was good of you to do that. But we just basically, everybody just done a little piece about, what Mindstore meant to them or just personal development in general, Jack. So, so it'd be good to see you again. So, obviously you're down south now.
You don't think I'm too busy that I wouldn't do it? I'd be delighted to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll keep in touch over the next wee while. If you're back in social media, we'll share the link and we put this on YouTube. So it'll get you a bit of an audience as well, and people that are listening can access Jack on the website and stuff. So yeah, as Alan says, thanks very much for your time, Jack. It's been great speaking to you again, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Great speaking to you both, and every success going forward. I hope you get away past the year that I did.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks again.